started. I brought my prop. This is the flag of Uganda. Rachel's going to introduce our visitor. I just want to say on behalf of the law school and the Cox Center, we're very happy that so many people came here. You're in for a treat. The way this will work is our visitor will speak for about a half hour, and then we'll have a half hour of questions from the audience. And then afterwards, we'll stay around so that you'll have a chance to talk to them individually. Without further ado, I turn this over to the president of the International Law Society, who has done a great job with their colleagues organizing events like this all year long. And all yours, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I'm here to introduce our guest, Mr. Munyantwali. He is the Executive Director and the founder of the International Law Institute's Africa Center of Legal Excellence, based in Uganda. It's really the first one of its kind. His organization started in 1997 and has been fostering prosperity through the rule of law, focusing on good governance and human rights and trade and global security, and teaching lawyers and judges and government officials in the area about law and how to set up legal institutions and how to do an outreach so that citizens in the area know how to engage the legal community and use the legal community as a way to promote economic development and to bring investment and trade into the region. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce. Oh, yes, and I wanted to present, we have a little gift for you. It's a nice sweatshirt from the Case Western Law School. And I forgot to mention that Mr. Munyantwali is a graduate of Case Western, so he is coming back to talk to all of us about his work in Africa.
Thank you all very much for a very warm welcome. I know exams are around the corner, and so sparing the time to come and listen to me speak is not probably top of your priority list. I'd like to thank very much Michael Sharp for inviting me back to this wonderful law school where I have lovely memories, and I was 18 years ago. So it's a pleasure to be back here, and I can see many fantastic improvements in this beautiful campus. The facilities have certainly improved. I thought I would talk about the work that we do, but in a different way. Talk about the role of legal infrastructure in the economic development of the sub-Saharan African region. Why legal infrastructure? You know, a number of stakeholders that we work with, economists and others, don't really get what it is that rule of law is. You know, when you say rule of law, it just doesn't really come to mind. So a number of years ago, I came up with the phrase legal infrastructure to sort of bring it home to folks. When you think of infrastructure, you think of roads, you think of bridges, hospitals, and when you say legal infrastructure, it comes quite clearly to people. And so that's really that's sort of the background of that title. I thought that it would be useful to sort of give you a sense of our economic context before really talking about some of the issues that the continent has to deal with at the moment. Michael has visited Uganda and the region many times, and I know Laura also visits the region, and it's really experiencing rapid growth. I don't know how many have visited Africa in this room, just by show of hands. So a fairly good number. And you know, on the board you will see some empirical evidence, and I've just pointed out a few examples. I was on a plane sometime in March, and I saw this, and I thought, wow, you know, Africa, the new India. When I was going to law school here, Africa was a basket case full of basically well known for curfews and coups and not very nice things. But today you begin to see the analogy being drawn between Africa and India. In 2007 to 2008, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania had growth rates at par with Asia's two powerhouses. In 2009, and this is from Newsweek, the February 19th Newsweek article, in 2009, during the depths of the global recession, sub-Saharan Africa clocked growth rates of 2%. Again, equal to the rates in the Middle East and outperforming everywhere else but India and China. Next year, the region is supposed to grow by 4.8%. Again, being compared to the economies that you see reflected on the board. A recent report by McKinsey, Lions on the Move, talks about the progress and potential of Africa's economies. This really, to us who live on the continent, really confirms what is going on. I mean, we see it happening every day. And really, it's a result of the peace dividend on the continent. Less war, more democracy, more foreign investment. And really, what is driving the growth? When you drive around cities in the region, I live in Kampala, you see large malls, apartment buildings, and what is really happening is there's a growing middle class, and there's increasing local and foreign investment. Some of the deals that reflect these new realities, if you've been reading in the Financial Times, you'll see that Walmart has recently indicated that an interest to make a purchase of a major South African retailer with operations around the region, $4 billion non-binding offer. Oil and gas transactions in Uganda. We were always a poor, landlocked country, and we still are. But oil has been discovered. Large oil deposits. This has attracted major players in the oil and gas industry from around the world to Uganda. UK FTSE Tullow Oil estimates total reserves in the range of 2 billion barrels, with 800,000 barrels already discovered. Now, with all of this investment, and I could talk about what is happening in the telecom area, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but you've got to have a supporting legal infrastructure to support this. There are going to be disputes and so on. And this is really where the question of legal infrastructure comes into play. And I've just provided some of the indicators. Inadequate court infrastructure. Physical infrastructure in disrepair, manual court decisions, manual case filing. We are involved currently in Lesotho following a competitive process where we're implementing a project funded by the Millennium Challenge Corporation. How many of you know the MCC? That is really the equivalent of USAID, but under the Bush administration, another agency was created to promote legal and judicial reform, really economic development initiatives. And we are upgrading the entire judicial infrastructure in Lesotho as part of that process. I'll talk about that later. But a result of this inadequate infrastructure is you have unsustainable case backlogs, which leads to cases being heard many years after filing. This is a huge concern to the investment community, where you have both private small matters and large matters being tied up in the high courts. Now, the good news is in a number of countries such as Ghana, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, commercial courts have been established to provide a separate venue for large matters. And this has helped to clear the backlog. But by and large, in most cases, the problem of slow adjudication of disputes prevails. Outdated or non-existent law reports. My wife, who used to be a public defender in Canada, when we got married, moved to Uganda and was involved in a law reporting project simply because law reports in a common law system were basically not being used. Cases were being decided on the basis of the case being presented before the judge. I mean, this is really no way to decide cases. Inadequately trained judges. This is a big problem. And I'll talk about the problem of inadequate law schools education in the region. So basically you have judges listening to commercial cases, previously members of the bar, that don't have the experience in commercial matters or any knowledge. And due to the lack of continuing judicial education, which should be commonplace, that presents the problem. Obviously, there are more advanced jurisdictions like South Africa, which is really, from all intents and purposes, a first world country, where that is not really an issue. We have just been awarded, I believe we'll be signing today, my colleagues are in Monrovia signing a contract that is funded both the World Bank and the African Development Bank to essentially train over 3,000 judicial officers in war-torn Liberia. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But that just shows you the extent of some of the problems. The bar, again, inadequate training. You know, as I was walking around campus, Michael was generous to take me around, you know, the rebirth of this place. I just said to Michael that there's an embarrassment of riches in this country. I mean, I know you're going through a recession and so on, but when you go and look at, you know, the facilities that you have here and that business school, you know, there's no reason to fail. There's just no reason to fail. When you go and look at the equivalent institutions in the sub-region, they're deplorable. Leaking roofs, no electricity, hardly any faculty are not publishing. This is the state of play. And so you basically have, in a nutshell, an inadequately trained bar. Law schools are offering training in antiquated subjects that were relevant at the turn of, you know, at independence, in the 50s and 60s, that don't reflect the current realities in the global marketplace. Again, coupled with the lack of mandatory continuing legal education, you have a serious problem. Now, I don't know if Mike has noticed this, but there are tons of new law schools emerging in the region. And these are not regulated. You know, you can start a law school, get a license from the Ministry of Education, and have students coming from around the East African region to attend your courses. I mean, these are money-making ventures. So this is sort of an indicator. Other indicators, other outdated commercial and other laws. Many jurisdictions, again, currently operate under legal regimes rooted during the time of independence. We were contracted by the government of Rwanda with World Bank funding to draft 16 commercial and related laws for the government. I mean, previously they were operating on a very outdated system when we drafted those laws, both in English and French. The Companies Act, imagine having companies coming in from around the world to do business and you don't have a legal framework under which they can operate. And the laws that we drafted included the Companies Act, private financing of infrastructure, condominium law, banking, and others. Another issue is the lack of a harmonized legal framework in the East African community, SADC, ECOWAS. Essentially what I'm referring to are regional economic communities. You have NAFTA here, and in Europe they have the European Union. And these days, trade is taking place across borders. So you have a businessman in Kenya doing business in Tanzania. I mean, this is happening more and more as there is, you know, just freer movements of people. The Customs Union now allows easy trade across borders in the case of the East African community in the 5 countries of Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. But in each jurisdiction, the actors are subject to different laws. So in the case of Rwanda, before we went there, or in Burundi, a Belgian legal framework. You can imagine what this provides. So that results in a lack of predictability in commercial operations. Lack of access to justice is another indicator, where you have essentially victims of crime, for example, needing to pay law enforcement to apprehend perpetrators of crimes. This is not uncommon. Corruption. Corruption tends to thrive in a regime where you have loose rules and limited accountability. Rent seeking in disorderly court registries leads to disappearance of files and endless continuances, which are both facilitated by the registry, by the bar, in collusion with some members of the bench, for instance. Now, what is being done to reverse the picture that I am painting? A number of initiatives that are mostly funded by bilateral and multilateral donors. And by bilateral, I refer to agencies like USAID, which will get into a private arrangement, not a private arrangement, but will provide funding to, say, a government like Uganda. Multilateral agencies are those which are owned by a number of developing and developed nation states like the World Bank or the African Development Bank. So it's a mixture of those development partners that are funding legal and judicial reform initiatives on the continent. Many will put this money into what is emerging to be justice, law, and order initiatives, whereby the country sits together with the development partner and determines the priorities that prevail and cost those priorities, and money is put into a basket, and then through procurement process, the procurement process, firms bid to do the work. Legal and judicial reform initiatives usually go it alone projects by the same agencies. And these really depend on the interest or the priorities of a particular donor. For instance, the Danish government, through the DANIDA initiative, the Danish International Development Agency, in Uganda for many years funded building of courts and increasing the information technology readiness of the courts to adjudicate disputes. So, that was their interest. Others are interested in eradicating corruption in an area, and they'll fund that. So others are interested in parliamentary reform. So it really depends. Some in prison and police reform, and all of these are important. But there are challenges which I will point out later. Implementing partners are agencies like ours which, following either award of a grant or competitive bidding process, implement a project on behalf of the development partners. And then there's standalone initiatives, what I refer to as initiatives that you set up in response to market needs, and that's the work that we are doing in the region, which is a response to a need. I just thought I would speak a little bit about some of the work that we're doing there. Other noble initiatives like the work Michael's doing in Uganda and other countries around the world, PILPG in the area of international criminal law that you know. We are involved in, again, building legal infrastructure in a number of ways, and I'll provide an example of some of the projects. They're really a combination of implementing partner. Most of our work, Laura's asking me how we fund ourselves. We've been in existence for 14 years. In the first 5 years, really depended on World Bank and other development partner grants. But of late, since that time, competitively bidding on projects in the region. Actually, we tend to be the only African institution that is shortlisted to bid with Western firms in Europe and the United States on projects, and 9 out of 10 times we tend to win those projects. And we're also a standalone initiative. We've been involved in supporting regional economic communities like the East African community. Currently, we are involved in helping to harmonize both legal education and practice, legal practice in the 5-country East African community area. In COMESA, which is the Common Market for East and Southern Africa, which is a 20-country grouping in the region, we've been since 2002, again following international competitive bidding, providing technical assistance and training to the 20-country bloc. We designed a procurement legal framework that would allow, basically, provide a harmonized regime for procurement with really a view to promoting trade and investment, subtext to really support small business in the region. In Rwanda, I mentioned the Rwanda case that we were involved, the Lesotho project that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, where we're establishing a new commercial court, small claims court, annexed court mediation, promoting the IT readiness of the judiciary to adjudicate disputes, and then carrying out extensive capacity building both for the bar and the bench. Liberia, I mentioned that project, that's going to be ambitious, but it will allow us to increase our operations throughout the West African region. We tend to use these projects as a vehicle to enter other markets. So we look at this as an opportunity to get into Gambia and some of the other ECOWAS countries. Special projects. From time to time, we are approached by governments, donors, foundations. We were approached by the Soros Foundation, where we're doing training in international criminal law. The whole idea with the Soros Foundation, and we're going to expand that program in 2011 and beyond, was essentially to provide the local capacity, the African capacity to adjudicate these international criminal laws. When you look at the ICTR and the ICTY and the others, they're mostly manned by experts from the West. Again, you get the best training here. So we are really providing the wherewithal to provide that knowledge. And we've provided training now in this. We just finished the second phase of training for participants from 20 countries around sub-Saharan Africa. Faculty from surrounding East African universities have also participated in our training. So we're trying to encourage the offering of international criminal law training in sub-Saharan African universities, and we'll be reaching out to you, Mike, to help us in this way also. We offer annually about 25 seminars, and this is separate and apart from special projects at our institute in Kampala on various subjects, essentially providing that knowledge bridge which is not being addressed by the problems that I addressed earlier. What are the challenges? The challenges are sustainability. Africa has huge potential, but maybe when you look at the analogy here to some of the sort of government programs, I think you might talk about some of the public assisted programs. If it isn't designed in a way that allows for independence, that can be a problem. And so the donors, for instance, design those programs. And once the funding from the donor has concluded, there goes the program. I think this is a real problem. We need to own those programs. My argument in a number of discussions that I have had with various development partners and government is we should not take on a program that we can't fund ourselves after its conclusion, even though in modest amounts. So that is an issue. Sustainability is a problem. Donor versus local-driven initiatives. Again, on the design side, you find donors designing and not really including or involving public and private sector participants in the design of the program. So that is an issue. And then the national focus. How does a legal and judicial or legal infrastructure initiative link with where you want to be in 20 to 50 years? That's a concern. It has to link with the vision. And that disconnect is of some concern. I think I've managed to do this in, I think, 25